Hi, this is Scott. I really appreciate our sponsors because they make the show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Developer Express. Become a UI superhero with DevExpress controls and libraries. Deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today. By leveraging your existing knowledge, you can build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. You can download your free 30-day trial at dx.hanselminutes.com. That's dx.hanselminutes.com.
From hanselminutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 512. In this episode, Scott talks with Chris Roth about the best way to get started making your own video games.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm talking about getting started making video games. When we've got on the phone here Chris Roth. Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm very excited to talk to you. You've been involved in production on games like Final Fantasy XIV and a lot of different games in different genres. You've made little games and big games. You've been involved in publishing and production worldwide.
Yeah. Well, mostly Europe-wide. I've moved around. Yes, I've moved around from Germany to London, back to Germany, and soon Sweden.
All right. That's exciting. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was I realized that in 25 years of software development, I don't think I've ever actually made a video game. Like, I play them, and I've written a lot of software. So before we started talking, I was thinking to myself, why haven't I made a video game? And I think it's because I perceive the barrier to entry as being very high.
Interesting. And not even at a hackathon or so? Not even there a little?
I think I thought that it would be a big deal, and I thought that there's no value in my little game, and that working on a video game would be an 18-month-long process with a team of artists and designers, and it would consume my life.
Well, I think it always depends on the definition of what a game is. I know that the most commonly known will be big AAA titles on the big consoles or PC even. But there are also a lot of smaller games that have gained huge international recognition or earnings. Best example would be Flappy Bird, that for a while made $50,000 in advertisement per day. And if you look at it, it's certainly not a huge or complex game. Or another thing, which very much can be debatable if it's a game, called Cow Clicker, a Facebook thing. It was gamified. You could click on a cow and then it would moo. It was developed by a guy called Ian Bogost. And it also made some great earnings for a while, but it was supposed to be some kind of art project, but with a gamification sense. And the cool thing is you can get like a game around very, very quickly, as the many game hackathons prove.
This weekend, I think that there is a global game jam. Isn't that right? They're trying to make a game in just a weekend.
Exactly. Every year, the entire game development community all over the world, regardless of what your profession or what your expertise is, comes together and creates a game for one theme, which will be revealed within each time zone and is kept secret in the other time zones until then. And yeah, sometimes people come as a team, sometimes they find themselves as a team, and some games have made their way to Xbox. I think one was called Through, where you play with Kinect and interact, your shadow will unveil platforms or hide platforms, and with a controller you have to jump on them. So it was a fun little combination of moving around, being very active, or as well as keeping the controller in mind.
What kind of theme? What's an example of a past theme? Or is it like zombies or platformers or Mario things?
Oh dear God. I think one was the world not as they see it, but as I see it, or something like that.
Oh, so it's very open-ended, like how you interpret the theme.
Yes. I probably got the theme wrong, but it's very much down to interpretation for the global game jam. But for others, it can be something like a word. It can be something like pick any word from today's newspaper's front page. It's really just a thing to get you started, because when you have everything open-ended and you have nothing to go with, then usually you have either no idea or way too many.
Ah, okay. So the theme tries to narrow things down and give you a general direction to go in.
Yes, to get you started.
And is this something that the listeners, like if you're listening now and you've never made a game, this is the weekend. This is a great time. Clear your schedule, get involved, and you don't need to be a part of a club or anything to do this.
Totally. And they do ask you to submit your project and to submit your game to the website, and everyone will do. But hey, even if you just want to participate on the sidelines, like you make your little project just to get a feel for it, why not? Mm-hmm. I don't think it's great when you abide the rules and everything, but if it's your first project, then I think it's nice to play and practice on the sidelines as well. Mm-hmm. However, if you're like really brave and convinced that your game is the next big hit, then sure, go ahead, submit it.
I like the examples of some of the games you gave that aren't that complicated, like Flappy Bird. I mean, ultimately, it's just one touch. And I think that when tablets began and iPads and iPhones started out, I don't think we thought that one could make a compelling or interesting game with just one finger. But then I'm looking at my own personal games section of my phone here, and I'm realizing that most of them are one finger type games. Like, Angry Birds is very pretty and it's a whole it's a whole worldwide phenomenon, but it's not a very complicated game mechanic, right? I mean, you're throwing rocks at other objects and physics takes over.
Very true. And I mean, if you can call it philosophy, but the idea behind the Flappy Bird creators' approach to creating games is to only have them work with one finger or have them operated with one finger, because assume you are in a bus, in a very busy bus, and you only have a place to stand. You have to hold on to a handrail. So you only have that one hand with one finger, and you still want to play a game. And they're a great pastime. And usually they're the most successful on the app stores, with quick revenue, high replayability, even over longer periods of time if you get the social features right.
Mm-hmm. And even more later, there have been very abstract games like, circles and nines and these kind of games where it's either just numbers on a grid or geometric shapes, moving through space. And these will be at the top of the charts.
Yeah. Or even other games that think around the corners, so to speak, like Monument Valley, or I think that was on the PS Vita, Echochrome, where you have to tilt the camera in a way that the path lines up to create a path. I find that really interesting. I have to admit, I have been a very big fan of threes, where you have to match up
threes,
numbers.
Rather. I was thinking nines, yes, threes.
And the thing is, I know that game has been released on Xbox, and it is still a nice pastime, but if I play threes, then actually always on my phone, because it feels like it has been designed for a phone. It just doesn't feel as right on the console, because trying to emulate or simulate touch controls on a console is just as difficult as trying to emulate directional pads and everything else on a mobile phone.
Yep, I tried very hard to play threes on the Xbox, and it's like the same thing with Bejeweled, right? There's a Bejeweled for Xbox, and it's obnoxious because you're moving the cursor around when you just want to touch the giant screen.
But it has the achievements.
It does have achievements. My wife got that 2048, which is like a threes clone. Yes. And what I found really interesting about it is, again, very simple game mechanic. She refused to stop playing until she got 2048. And this went on for months. She got her 2048. She took a screenshot, and then she's done. She just walks around with that screenshot. So if it ever comes up again, she has that ready to go and say, nope, I won that. That game is now dead to me.
Excellent. I'm like that with achievements.
Yeah, so, I'm a bit of a completist myself as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole host of game types. There's also a host of game mechanics. You mentioned AAA games. That got me thinking about first-person shooters in 3D. that seems like a really hard thing to get into. If I'm getting into making games, should I start with like a Mario type game, or should I just do text-based games?
It really depends on what your background is. For example, I have worked with many teenagers, especially female teenagers, because we've got this thing called Girls' Day in Germany, where one day every year, girls around 14 years old are encouraged to learn about technical jobs and companies. And I got to talk to a lot of them during one of those events and realized that most of them are very much into making music, writing stories, creating artwork. And almost none of them were aware that they could use that skill in game development as well. So you can, for example, start with text-based adventures. And it doesn't have to be so-called MUD. I don't know if that's still a thing, like the text-based multi-user dungeons. I used to play them on Telnet.
I think we've dated ourselves there.
Maybe. But there's a tool called Twine, and you can find it on twinery.org. And there you create HTML-based text adventures. You can create different choices, and depending on how much you want to get into JavaScript or even just HTML, you can change the appearance. You can also add actual functionality to it. So you can make a real text-based RPG with random functions, with like an item inventory, etc. So that's a great starting point to learn how to code as well for web apps even. So you get your first touch points with HTML and JavaScript, and then you use it for other applications. You can use further tools like RPG Maker or Game Maker to focus on the story. And if you want to look at things like Unity, then you will find something called an asset store. And in the asset store, which GameMaker also has, you find the work of other people who will share their work with you, so you don't have to be an expert at drawing or an expert at coding, but you just can click together the games that you would like. And it doesn't matter what kind of game you want to make. It can be a puzzle game. So the Unity course that I created was a Flappy Bird clone. I also did a C# course with a Whack-A-Mole type game. It could be a memory type game. It's really just adding a visual layer to, programming problem, so to speak, and finding a solution for that.
Yeah, I'm starting to realize that the barrier is a lot lower than I thought. I was playing recently with an Oculus Rift development kit, and someone had made a game which was basically fly a helicopter and try to land it. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, that must have been incredibly difficult for them to make. Turns out they went into Unity, made a kind of a default 3D type game, went and bought like a $5 model of a helicopter. So the person didn't even have to make the helicopter. And what was cool about it was that this particular model had a very detailed dashboard. So the individual put the camera in the seat of the helicopter, which was an unusual, that was the little spark of creativity. Rather than being on the outside of the helicopter, they went on the inside. And then, a weekend later, you had a first-person virtual reality 3D helicopter simulator. And, it was very well received. It was really more plugging Lego pieces together than it was development.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you have to code a little. I think it would be wrong to say, especially with Unity, that you just go ahead and create good games without writing a single line of code.
Of course.
But it's not as much as writing something natively. I think if you wanted to get into C++ and DirectX development, that would be a lot more frustrating as a starting experience than getting started with Unity and just having to create some special scripts. You can afterwards dabble with C++ and DirectX. Like if you want to get into AAA development, like the Halos of the world, then it would be very advisable. But let's face it, most of the games are now being released on mobile because the threshold is just so low for getting it out there, which I find really nice. It's sometimes hard to stand out, but good games still will stand out.
And interestingly, good games will sometimes sit around for a year and then be discovered.
Yes, by someone who will just rant on Twitter or so. Yeah, very true.
Hey folks, I wanted to take a moment to tell you about Raygun and their new product called Pulse. Raygun is an error and crash reporting software provider, and their new product, Pulse, it's a real-time user monitoring product. It gives you performance data and user insights. Lets you understand exactly what's happening when users interact with your software, so you're never left guessing. Raygun provides you with the answers to your performance questions, and they've found over 10 billion, that's billion with a B, bugs in customer apps with their crash reporting product. And now Raygun will help you understand application quality like no one else. Over 30,000 developers worldwide can't be wrong. I use Raygun all the time, and I enjoy it very much. You can try it out today with a no-risk 30-day free trial. Start improving your software quality immediately. Try Raygun for free today at raygun.io. Yeah, a buddy of mine took the app A Dark Room, which is, have you ever played that game?
No.
A Dark Room is a text adventure, and it's a minimalist, and you basically...
Is it a web game or is it an app?
So it started as a web game, and it says A Dark Room, light fire, and there's a single button, and then you press light fire, and then you stoke the fire, and then you make your team, and you have a hut, and you build sticks, and it's all done entirely in text. It's about the most minimalist game ever. But okay. Amir went and took this and ported it over to iPhone, and it was the top of the iPhone charts for like a year.
Oh, wow. Because I was once at a hackathon in Berlin where we had two people who were actually from London, and they created a text adventure which sounded very similar on that weekend. And they spent all night recording all the sound bits for that. And that was actually made in Twine, for example, which is why I was slightly surprised right now. I was like, oh, a nice reminder.
Yeah,
but you know what's really cool? I got the chance to work with the newer Kinect, like the V2, that you can now use the Xbox version with an adapter for your PC. And you can do two things with that. You can either scan your own objects. Like if you're really into handcraft, then you can scan them in 3D and put them out into your game. And the other thing is that you can record your own animations, so you can make your game really personal without any knowledge of how to animate an object in the computer, so to speak. So I wouldn't know how to create an animation from scratch just using software tools. But with that, within 5 minutes, I had a walking, a waving, a jumping animation, just like that. And that's also perfect to get started.
What was the tool that was connecting to the Kinect that would take that image and turn it into an animation?
The software is a plugin for Unity, and it's called Cinema Mocap.
Cinema Mocap, as in motion capture.
Yes.
Very cool. The point you made earlier about Unity and having to write a little bit of code, when you made that Flappy Bird lab, I remember I had my kids run through a lab. My kids are 8 and 10, and they were able, in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, with help with it was Stacy Mulcahy was leading an event, and all these kids were learning how to do this. I think we wrote maybe 25 lines of code.
It's very little. I mean, after all, you just have to move, you have to move either the obstacles or the bird, depending on which way you want to have it around. That's like 2 or 3 lines. Don't know. Then you have to make it react to the tap and make it jump, and maybe declare some variables for the jump height as well. And then you need to define what happens in terms of obstacle generation as well as collision. So those 4 things. And the moving part, like the reacting to the tap, I think that comes with one of the predefined assets. But the thing that I don't like with predefined assets is that they usually overloaded. They're not in the programming term overloading, but rather there's too much that you don't need. And
they come with a lot of defaults that aren't necessary.
Yes, a lot of functionality that isn't necessary. And if you change one thing, or if you want to change one thing, then sometimes it may be hard to find it.
Ah, interesting.
So,
the one thing that I was impressed about, because this was my first time using Unity, was going through this lab with my kids, was I assumed there'd be a lot of math and sine waves and cosine and this and that, and I'd have to teach an 8-year-old about physics and the gravity of the thing, to have the bird fall to the ground. I thought was going to be a problem. But that physics engine, at least in the context of a 2D physics engine, was just an asset. It was built in. Like, it was a solved, like the idea that the physics in the game are a solved problem brought me mentally into 2015, because the last time I thought about game development was in the mid 90s or early 90s, where, we were moving pixels around one at a time, and there was no such thing as a physics engine, John Carmack was just thinking about that stuff at that point.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not just in 2D, it's also in 3D, also collision detection. Normally, I'd say it's not the easiest thing to handle. But in Unity, for example, you just set an element, a component it's called collider, and they can have different shapes, either standard shapes like circle or a sphere or a box or whatever. Or you can create your own mesh colliders or polygon colliders for more custom shapes. And then the only thing you need to do is you need to access the event collision, or the collision event, sorry. And that's the only thing. So you call up void on collision enter something, and then in there you just define what will happen. And ideally, you also quickly check what the thing has been colliding with, because otherwise you will step on the ground and you will destroy the earth.
I wonder why I still see in 2015, 2016, actually I just realized it. I said 2015, it's 2016, why collision detection it's still hard. Sometimes I see, like, I'll play a game and I'll go through a wall. I'm like, really? We used to see that early on where, the arm of the character would go through the wall. And I wonder why people don't use, the Crysis engine or Unreal Engine, and they still insist on doing it themselves.
Well, there's various things to keep in mind. Like, for example, if you have a complex object, then you may have to create a complex collision field. And for the sake of saving performance, you may just cover the core body, but not the arms, for example. And the other thing is the collision detection speed. Like, I was trying to create a football soccer wall game. Mm-hmm. Controlled by the Kinect. If I controlled it with a mouse or with a keyboard, everything was fine. But if I wanted to control it with the Kinect, then I would shoot very quickly, and that was too fast for the computer. And I'm not that good at football. It was just that the frames per second weren't enough. And that can sometimes be a problem as well. And sometimes it's just a matter of glitches.
So when you're getting into like the AAA type stuff, this is where we hear about things like, on the PlayStation, they have X number of CPUs and one is dedicated just to this aspect of the game. And sometimes I'll hear that, like, for example, on the Xbox, you can hit the home button and it takes you home, but you can disable that and get an extra 3% of CPU back or something. And game designers need that sometimes.
Yes. Unfortunately, I don't know if you, how much you play on your phone and how complicated the games are or how demanding performance-wise they are. Unfortunately, I think that the better the devices get, the sloppier the coding gets. So things like keeping track of the disk space, keeping track of memory, keeping track of CPU load or of battery drain, essentially, for mobile devices, is something that we do not do a lot. And some friends at Intel gave a talk recently on how to optimize for battery life. And those were really simple things like, you don't need 60 frames per second on the main screen where nothing moves. Stuff like that, which I find important because I've got a phone, and if I play, like, it's an endless runner that I'm playing at the moment just to get the achievements, then the battery will be drained within 2 hours max. And that's appalling, I think.
Yeesh. So you got stuck inside of a deep, hard for loop, and there's no yielding.
Yeah. So, yeah. And that is unfortunately the case with hardware that gets better. And I think it would be nice to also learn about how to become more efficient, but it's not necessarily something to get started with.
That was going to be my next question.
But what I find impressive, do you remember the demo scene from way back when?
Yes, demo scenes. People in demo scenes would say, well, what can I do on a Commodore 64 in just 12K? Yeah. They'll give some ridiculous constraints, and then they'll go and create an entire 3D world with marbles and ray tracing in 12K. And here I am on a 16 gig machine with a 700 series NVIDIA, and I'm told it is not powerful enough for VR.
Yes. I found what they created very admirable, be it the music, be it the procedural graphics creation, etc. Be it in 12K or even in 4K or the bigger ones, the bigger they got, the more impressive they got. But if you kept in mind that some of them only were at 4K and looked at the results, dear God. And they're still around. I think they're great people to meet as well. And they also have some user group meetups, for example.
Yeah, I think that actually I had a gentleman on from Ocean Software recently who worked on some of the early music, the SID-based music, and he was hand coding music, and
wow.
I kind of like, kind of shook my fist in the air like the old man that I am, and I'm like, that's how we should do it. We should hand code our music. It got me thinking about the coder scene, like back when computers were hard, and I have a bit of a mixed feelings about the game maker, drag and drop, Unity, where it's like, it's great and it's amazing, but I don't know. There should be some difficulty. So I want to get people involved, but at the same time, I miss those, back 30 years ago when it was difficult.
There is one major issue with handwriting or natively coding everything. I mean, when you look at your circle of friends and especially outside of the Microsoft realm, I'd say the types of hardware that is being used is very, very mixed. It also depends on where I go. Sometimes it's a lot of iPhones, sometimes it's a lot of Android phones, and sometimes it's a lot of Windows phones. And even in my circle of friends, it's very mixed as well. So just coding for one system would limit you from the majority of the market. And even if you wanted to have your friends to try out your game, it would be difficult already. And those tools like Unity Game Maker or even Unreal help you to get it out on different platforms with minimal effort, so you can concentrate on the game rather than, getting everything else to work.
That is a really, really good point. I think it is easy to dismiss the benefits. It's not just, I didn't have to do a physics engine, but I didn't even have to think about anything other than screen size, and touch was handled for me and all that kind of stuff.
Totally. However, I think for getting started with coding, it's good to also look at just creating 1 or 2 games natively for PC. Like just use it and try to make it once to get an idea of what else is involved. It doesn't have to be a complicated game. Just make a memory game or so. And then you can apply that knowledge back in the engine. But I would advise against using very exotic languages. I know that there's some how to make a game courses in various exotic programming languages or scripting languages. If you want people or your kids to get interested in creating a game and finding other people to create them with, it's good to have them use tools and languages that are widely used also to find answers to problems or questions on Stack Overflow or so.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about how after this podcast, I'm going to get my kids making a game. And I'm thinking that of all the things you've mentioned, for a young person, a very young person, or a middle schooler, as we would call them, that the Twinery, Twinery, twinery.org is a really great opportunity, because I want them to learn how to write. But it gets it to the essence of the game mechanic. And in this case, it's a text-based, go left, go north, get your things. It's like a very simple system, and it doesn't require me to teach them HTML.
Yeah. And there are a lot of great tools. Like I remember a couple of years ago, we had a bar camp that we organized in Berlin, and our main speaker was just 11 years old at the time. And he taught the audience that was made up of mostly adults, how to create a game with Kodoo. Now, I guess we would prefer Project Spark. So that's a great way of learning how, game loops work, how to check for things. But they have certain limitations in creating actual finished games that you can put out on different platforms. So I think I would use a mixture of Twine, maybe Project Spark, and then little by little get into GameMaker or Unity, depending on whether they feel more comfortable with web languages or something like C#.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kodoo, for folks who didn't understand how to spell that, is KODU, KodooGameLab.com. I'll put all of this in the show notes. Project Spark is pretty interesting. I've been playing that on my Xbox One, but I have found though that it's almost too easy to make a boring and stupid game, but the amount of work required to make a really complicated game involves rather a bit of understanding of their interface. My boys were able to go and make a forest, make a goblin, and then basically that was it. They were done and they were just running around beating up on these other goblins, and they're like, "This is great, we can make games." I'm like, well, no, you didn't really do anything. You had it auto-generate a forest and you put a bunch of goblins around and now you're beating them up.
Well, but if it's a first thing to, like, a first success, like at a hackathon, we had another 11-year-old kid, a boy, and he was using Unity for the very first time. And the only thing he did was create a terrain with some icy patches on it and with a waterfall and with trees, and he could run around with a 3D character on it. And he was so proud that after a day and a half, he has created that. He even did a talk about it. Like, he presented the result himself in front of the entire group. And that got him motivated to come to the next hackathon and try out more. And, but it's a great thing to get a feel for the interface. I don't know, have you ever used something like Cubase, for example, like a really complicated or really advanced editing tool for anything?
Not really.
Okay, because whenever I opened Cubase for a while, I opened it, and so it's a sound editing tool. And then you get overwhelmed because the interface is so complicated, and if you're a newbie, it might even scare you. So the key thing is the KISS principle, like keep it simple, stupid. Is that actually the last?
Keep it simple.
Yeah. And then isn't the second S?
It is stupid, yeah, I'm afraid so, yes. Keep it simple, stupid is what the KISS principle is.
Anyway, but keeping it simple lets you focus on one thing at a time. I think if you try to create too much, if you try to create the next Halo, then you will just get frustrated along the way, because with every single step you will run into an issue, into a question that you need to solve, and then because you are a beginner and you are asking an advanced question, people in the forums may not be as friendly as you might like them to be. I find that sometimes a problem with the online community. But if you love playing Flappy Bird, for example, or this 2D space shooter, why not try and program something like that to get started with? And then take it from there. Because with each game that you create, just can be a weekend game. You will learn something new, and you will have something new for your library of scripts and plugins, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. It is about that feeling of accomplishment. And, you shouldn't judge your early work. If you accomplish something, like, I shouldn't downplay the fact that they did make a bunch of goblins and put them in a forest and fight them. But I think that's a good reminder. So Project Spark is in the Windows 10 store. It's on Xbox. Kodoo is a Kodoo Game Lab. And I'm going to add, of course, links to that and twinery.org in the show notes. Thanks so much for chatting with me today, Chris.
Thank you for having me on the show. It was great fun talking to you.
My pleasure. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.